Introduction. It could be said that the seed of globalization was sown when Moses declared to the Hebrew people that there was one commandment to be obeyed above all others. That commandment, the first of 10, was, I am Yahweh your God. You shall have no gods except me. This was the beginning of monotheism as we know it today. Monotheism created the necessary container or myth that has facilitated the development of globalization. The God of Moses, who ended up living in the heavens, has a global vision of the earth. From this perspective, the earth is seen as one unit. In economic terms, the earth is one market. Monotheism is like a cuckoo's egg in the nest of another bird. If there's only one God, then belief in all other gods must be rejected. The existence of other gods cannot be tolerated. They must be thrown out of the nest. If there's only one God, then the correct way of seeing things is this God's way. All other ways of seeing things are anathema. The relationship of this God to the earth is that of creator-created. According to the Genesis story, the earth was created and everything on it in 6 days. On the seventh day, God rested. The implicit presumption in this story is that after the creation, this God's work was done. He retired to the heavens and left the earth to fend for itself. While distant, he would be available if called upon. Monotheism sets this God in the heavens as the ideal towards which we should all strive. We are invited to take a journey to the heavens, to be with God. The journey it calls us to make is one that disconnects us from the earth. Society has established this journey for us. The paths are already there for us to traverse. Many people have travelled this journey before us, including probably our parents. If we follow the path that society has laid out for us, consciously or unconsciously, we will journey towards disconnectedness. We start this journey by removing ourselves from the local and the particular. We leave the land that we are familiar with, that we identify with. We deliberately leave behind the sense of belonging, of local community, of communal identity. We become individuals, disconnected from our roots, floating, as it were, above the surface of the earth. As we continue this journey, we begin to see ourselves as separate from nature. We live in cities where we are removed from nature. We are on the earth, but not of it. Nature then becomes an object, something other than us, a resource that we can use. We lose all sense of the sacred in nature. The old ways of seeing mountains as holy, lakes as the layers of demons, trees as carrying special meaning, animals as spirit carriers, birds as mediators of the divine, wells as entrances into the womb of Mother Earth, are all gone. According to this monotheistic myth, the gods, the spirits, the divine energies have removed themselves from the earth and now live in the heavens as one entity, leaving behind a spiritless land of products, resources, and waste. On completion of this journey towards God, we believe we will achieve the ultimate perspective, a detached view of the world from heaven or outer space. There we will become like this God. We will lose our material dependence on this earth. We will lose any remaining connection with this earth. We will become one with God. Modern economic globalization. Globalization, as we know it today, is a movement towards oneness. All humankind is moving towards the hegemony of one point of view, one way of doing things, of one style of living on this planet. The diverse ways in which humans have lived on this earth in the past are being discarded, and now one size fits all. In the Western world, it is easy to see that most people no longer have a connection with the land. Garaged in cities and towns, they have lost the sense of community and local belonging that living on the land engendered. Their lives are deeply immersed in products and services. Like the God they believe in, they are creators. Their connection is not to the earth, but to products of their own making. The developed parts of the world have arrived at this state of total immersion in production and consumption. But in the less developed parts of the world, we can still witness the process of dynamic transformation that has to take place for people to reach this point. In these countries, people are being uprooted from their indigenous and subsistence ways of living. They are migrating to the cities, where they look for paid work. Their lands are being transformed into large-scale industrial food-producing units. Their markets are opening up to the multinational corporations. In this process, people leave behind their deep-rooted connection to nature, to place, and to community. Their loneliness at the loss of this connectedness is artificially eased by an attachment to products, an attachment that is encouraged by the global market and especially by advertising. Products and services. Products are materials of all descriptions that have been taken out of their natural setting and processed in order to be made useful to people who do not live in that setting. People in the developed world do not hunt for their food, nor do they grow it in their own gardens and farms. They buy their food in shops and supermarkets. All of their food comes in the form of products. As globalization increases, these food products are becoming homogenized and available globally. Today we live in a world of products and services. Our food, our entertainment, our means of transport, our education, our healthcare, all are now products or services, human creations that we pay for and consume. It is hard to imagine living in a world without them. This is because it has been made impossible to live in any other way. Yet, this world of production and consumption is only a recent phenomenon. Less than 100 years ago, the people of the island of Inishmore, where I now live, had virtually no modern products or services. They lived off the land and the sea, and they cared for each other as best they could. The word globalization has entered our vocabulary at this time because the availability of products and services has reached a critical mass worldwide. As this book illustrates, the journey towards globalization began with the creation of the monotheistic myth. The first global products and services were created by corporate Christianity. Only in more recent times have multinational corporations become the main drivers of this process. Progress, development, and globalization. It has taken from the time of Moses to today for changes to take place in the world to the point where it is now possible for nations to negotiate the opening up of their markets so that products and services from anywhere in the world can be sold there. From this steady progression, we have coined the word progress. Progress means the achievement of steps in the direction of globalization. Development is a word used to describe the creation of the necessary conditions for that progress to take place. Progress and development are key words that make sense only in the context of globalization. Globalization is a snowball that has been rolling down the snowy slopes of the centuries and has now reached so massive a size that it is unstoppable. We can point to Moses as being the one who took the first handful of snow, squeezed it into a ball, and set it rolling. It has been kept rolling by powerful people within the human family who furthered the potential of global power, global influence, and global dominance throughout the centuries. At this point in time, globalization is no longer controlled by any one group of people or by any one nation. It is a world movement which has reached a massive scale because enough people across the globe subscribe to its vision and invest in its achievements. While the snowball continues to roll and gather further weight and volume, these people will be happy. However, they are not looking at the bottom of the mountain towards which the snowball is hurtling. Global infrastructure. Globalization is not just the trading of global products and services. It is also the transformation of the Earth's surface so that it has the necessary infrastructure to facilitate this trading. A land without proper roads, bridges, harbours, airports, electrical and communication networks, fuel supplies, factories, shops, banks, and so on cannot accommodate globalization. The traditional lands of indigenous polytheistic peoples do not have this infrastructure. Globalization, above all, is the harnessing of human energy worldwide into a lifestyle of production and consumption. The modern human relates to the earth as that of creator to created. All material things are either human products, resources for human creativity, or waste. Humans no longer live at one with nature, but relate to nature as creators, planners, and managers. In summary, globalization transforms the physical landscape and the lives of all humans living on that landscape. Ultimately, everything living on this planet is affected. As humankind today reaches the penultimate stages of this journey towards globalization, it is significant that the photograph of the Earth from outer space has become an icon of our time. This photograph is a declaration that humanity has arrived at a place where it can view the Earth from outer space. Humanity now has the perspective of God. The monotheistic vision is almost fulfilled. Humankind is in the final stages of becoming one with God. This book takes a binocular look at the influence of monotheism, and particularly Roman Christianity, on the spread of globalization as we know it today. The phenomenon is looked at from two perspectives, which give the book two distinct halves. The first half of the book looks at the macro picture, the roots of globalization in monotheism and Christianity, and the development of Roman Christianity as a global corporation. The second half of the book looks at the micro picture, the effect that an ambitious global corporate version of Christianity had on a small, independent and indigenous Irish Christianity. It is hoped that the effect of combining the two perspectives in this binocular way will allow for a three-dimensional picture. This book attributes the origin of monotheism to Moses. Monotheism emerged out of a milieu that was almost entirely polytheistic. Judaism became the first example of a sustainable society based on the idea of monotheism. However, it was not until Christianity began to develop its own institutional structure, having inherited the Judaic version of monotheism and adapted it to its own agenda, that the full possibilities of globalization began to be imagined. From the 4th century CE onwards, mainstream Christianity committed itself to building an institutional framework to creating a worldwide infrastructure and to developing its sacraments and services in order to achieve worldwide dominance. It became the first global corporation. Chapters 6 to 8 chart Roman Christianity's gradual achievements of these goals. In the second half of the book, the issue of ecclesiastical globalization is looked at from a different angle. The perspective here is from the other side, that of the recipient of globalization. Celtic society in Ireland and in northern and western Britain was one of those societies on the edge of the known world that had absorbed the Christian story and made it its own. As the Roman Church developed at the centre of Europe into an authoritarian institution with a so-called Orthodox creed, the version of Christianity being practiced by the Celtic people became intolerable to it. This book pieces together the story of the gradual erosion of Celtic Christianity from Britain, from mainland Europe, and eventually from Ireland. The first confrontation between Celtic Christianity and Roman Christianity took place when the Celtic monk Pelagius challenged the teachings of Augustine of Hippo in the late 4th century. Despite the defeat of Pelagius in this confrontation, Celtic Christianity did not go away. It remained an irritant to Roman Christianity for a further 700 years and was, at one time, even a threat to its dominance. The matter was eventually settled when the Roman Church, accompanied by the Norman military, overran Ireland ecclesiastically and politically in the 12th century. This book spans 4 millennia. It tries to weave together the strands of history in a new way. The view taken is that of someone standing at the edge of Ireland in the Atlantic Ocean, looking east across Ireland, Europe, and the world. This view facilitates the recognition of a solid connection between what commercial global corporations are doing today and what organized Christianity with a global mission was doing over 1,000 years ago. The results have been and are the same: the destruction of diversity, the disconnection of human society from nature, from the feminine, and from place, and the imposition of a hegemony or one-size-fits-all for all people. Each chapter is written with the intention of being complete in itself. This has led, in some instances, to a certain amount of repetition. For example, the collapse of the Roman Empire in the 5th century had repercussions not just throughout Europe, but in Britain and in Ireland. In separate chapters, where I deal with these places and this event, I must, of necessity, repeat the essential aspects of this moment in history in order to set the context for what is to follow. Overall, I hope that the reader finds that the book has a cohesiveness to it. It is attempting to question our certainties, our hidden agendas, and our unconscious attitudes. The thesis of the book is that we live in a bubble that is now 4,000 years old. That bubble is defined by monotheism. Within it, the globalization projects of religion and commerce find their home. This book took many years to write. It is the result of a process of reflection over a lifetime. Much work has been required to clarify my thoughts and write them down in a linear and coherent fashion for the purpose of producing this book. This has been the most difficult project I've ever undertaken. I owe deep gratitude to my wife, Tess Harper, for the love, patience, and wholehearted support she has given me in so many ways throughout the project. Chapter 1. Polytheism, a world of diversity. Summary. Polytheism and monotheism are two radically different perspectives on the world. The gods and goddesses of polytheism are to be found in the immediate natural environment. The God of monotheism is to be found in heaven. Polytheism, of its nature, embraces diversity. Monotheism is essentially dogmatic. In this chapter, the polytheism of ancient Ireland is used to illustrate these differences. End of summary. Many people today experience a sense of the divine when they are out in nature. They take a walk in the forest, or go down to the seashore, or sit at the edge of a river. There, they can feel a certain presence, or energy, or mystery. In ancient times in Ireland, the spiritual presence or energy or mystery to be experienced in these places of nature had the name of a specific god or goddess. One did not go there to talk to some abstract general concept of God, but to engage with a particular god or goddess associated with that place or object. Polytheism, wherever one finds it in the world, is nature-based. Many of the gods and goddesses of polytheistic cultures are personifications of aspects of nature. To be more specific, they are personifications of the humanly experienced spiritual essence of a particular place or element of nature. These essences that are experienced are archetypical energies. That is, they are a common experience among humans everywhere. Diverse forms of polytheism found throughout the world are uncannily alike. Nature-based worship. It is incorrect to say that Celtic people worshipped trees and rivers, or the sun and the moon. But in a world where mystery was everywhere, each of these elements of nature triggered in these people a specific experience of magic and wonder. Take, for example, the oak tree. Why was it that the Druids performed their rituals in oak groves? Were they worshipping the oak trees? The answer to this question may lie in a fact of which we moderns, with our pathological disconnectedness from nature, are unlikely to be aware. When a forest, filled with a variety of tree species, is struck by lightning, the likelihood is that the lightning will strike the oak tree rather than any of the others. We now know scientifically why this is the case. Lightning strikes oak trees rather than any others because the oaks are more conductive of electricity than other species. Lightning will always take the easiest route into the earth, and in a forest of trees, the oak tree is the easiest route. But the early Celtic people of Ireland did not have this scientific explanation. What they saw was, to them, an amazing phenomenon, that the oak tree was almost always the one singled out by lightning. This was wondrous and mysterious, and it challenged the human imagination to come up with an explanation. Out of this search for meaning came a mythological story which explained the phenomenon. The explanation came in the context of a belief in a god called Tyrannus, who lived in the sky, as distinct from heaven. This god manifested himself through thunder and lightning and other such occurrences above one's head. When this god chose to communicate with the earth, he sent a burst of lightning down from the sky and often picked out an oak tree for its transmission. Therefore, if humans wished to communicate with this god, it made sense to gather at the base of an oak tree to do so. This explanation of a phenomenon gave the Celtic people a particular relationship with the oak tree, which put the oak on a higher level than all other trees. The oak tree's spiritual properties were further defined by its relationship with another god, Esus. The energy, power, and strength of this god, Esus, were believed to be contained in the oak. Each species of tree had its own specific properties, and these properties created their own associations with divine beings in the imaginations of the Celts. So, Celtic people did not worship the oak tree or any other tree, but they used the oak tree to make a tangible connection with deities associated with the properties of that tree. Similarly, Celtic people did not worship the sun, but they did worship the god Lu, who personified the essence of the positive human experience of the sun, that of its light and warmth, and the help that the sun gave for the growing of the crops and the ripening of the harvest. The god Lu was celebrated in rituals at the Lunasa festival, which took place at the beginning of the harvest in early August. A god named Balor personified the negative experience of the sun that one had when the weather got too hot or too cold, when crops withered from lack of rain or died from frost, when spontaneous fires broke out, when there was a shortage of water, or when snow on the ground meant the animals had no grass. While this god was hated and feared, his presence had to be acknowledged, and a way had to be found to keep him pacified. This was done by making sacrificial offerings to him. Mythologically, these sacrificial offerings were described as a heavy burden of tax placed on the people by Balor. In Irish mythology, Balor and Lu, the two sun gods, were in opposition to each other. As the new agricultural year began with the coming of spring, Balor and Lu entered into deadly combat. Throughout spring and summer, the battle between them raged. The people fought with Lu, but Balor had his army of Fomorians. With the first signs of a harvest and the survival of the crop or of the new generation of animals, the victory of Lu was declared, and the Lunasa festival began. The following year, the cycle would start again. Echoes of the Lunasa festival are still to be found throughout Ireland. At Croagh-Patrick, a holy mountain in County Mayo, the festival is celebrated by the climbing of the mountain. In Cushyglen, County Kerry, the festival is celebrated by elevating a wild puck goat on a high platform in the middle of the village. This experience, both of the good and bad effects of the sun, was an experience common to everyone. All were dependent on the weather and on the success of crops and of animal reproduction for their survival, as we still are to this day. The stories of Lu and Balor created a container for and gave a broad context and meaning to the annual struggle for survival and the production of adequate food for the coming year. In this way, the Celts were able to explain to themselves and to their children why it was that each year they had to go through this struggle with their crops and animals before harvest time. To them, divine forces of good and evil were at work. Humans took part in the battle, but the battle was greater than them. Nature-based polytheism meant that the divine presence of a particular god or goddess was encountered in a particular place on the landscape. One went to a certain mountain to honour a particular god, and to a certain river to honour a particular goddess. In Ireland, the goddess Boine was associated with the River Boyne, on Voin, and the river was called after her. The mountain Croagh Alia, now Croagh-Patrick, was associated with the god Lu, the god of light. These places were sacred and were used for sacred worship. They could not therefore be desecrated by any form of inappropriate human behaviour. A rich spiritual vocabulary. The polytheistic gods personify the sense of the divine that people experience in relating to different aspects of nature. The experiences are available to anyone without the mediation of priest or druid. Polytheism identifies the typical ways in which an ordinary person can experience the divine while going about his or her daily tasks. It projects a personality, face, and name of a god or goddess onto this experience. This gives a language and a vocabulary to a wide diversity of spiritual experience and allows that language to be commonplace among the people. Monotheism does not have this richness of language and vocabulary for everyday spiritual experiences. Because the God of monotheism lives in heaven and not on this earth, the language of monotheism did not develop to facilitate spiritual experiences associated with nature or with daily tasks. The language of monotheism focuses more on the inner transformational experiences associated with threshold moments in one's life. Experiences such as birth, coming of age, marriage, illness, and so on. In the Christian tradition, Francis of Assisi was a remarkable exception to this, as were the Celtic monks in general. Celtic Christian spirituality is also exceptional in that, quite specifically, the daily tasks of kindling the fire, making the bread, milking the cow, lighting the lamp, and so on, are all imbued with spiritual content and meaning. Monotheism is dogmatic. Monotheism is dogmatic of its very nature. It requires one to believe in a particular all-powerful, all-encompassing God, and forbids a belief in any others. Both Moses and Muhammad, the founders of Judaism and Islam, were adamant that their people must reject all other gods and believe only in their chosen solitary God. This was their first commandment. It was a commandment that was impressed upon the people over and over again, until it became a mantra for them, as it still is among the followers of Judaism and Islam today. Once this fundamental requirement of monotheism was established among its adherents, other dogmatic theological requirements were also elaborated. A creed of orthodox teachings emerged. Orthodox in this context means the teaching that has the stamp of approval of the main authorities. These teachings are controlled by a central authority structure, and those who wish to belong are required to subscribe to these teachings. In this process, unacceptable tenets of faith are condemned, and those who hold them are ostracized. What has emerged within monotheism, therefore, is a strictly defined creed and a strictly interpreted mythological story that has no anomalies or contradictions in it. This creates exclusivity. Membership is available only to those who subscribe to this carefully defined set of beliefs. Monotheism is radically different from polytheism in all its forms. Within monotheism, the emphasis from the beginning has been on controlling what people believe. In polytheism, this type of authoritarian control of beliefs does not exist. Polytheism is non-dogmatic. Polytheism in Celtic society, and wherever else it was found, was not dogmatic. Unlike monotheism, where the emphasis was on subscribing to a particular belief, Celtic polytheism put the emphasis on relating to a particular divine energy as humanly experienced. There were no creeds in pre-Christian Celtic society, only mythological stories. The mythological stories of polytheistic cultures are carried in oral traditions that allow for many different versions of the same story and many different stories about the same subject. There is no requirement to believe one version as opposed to the other. Each version of the story can be used as a way of looking at the mysterious elements of life. Similarly, there is no definitive list of gods and goddesses. People choose to engage with the gods and goddesses that are of most relevance to them in their particular situation. Polytheism, unlike monotheism, allows for diversity, overlap, paradox, and contradictions in its stories. To illustrate this, let us look at a collection of Celtic mythological stories about the land. For all polytheistic cultures, the land was sacred. In Celtic culture, the land of Ireland was the body of a goddess. Her most ancient name was Anu, but she had many other names. One could see the outline of her body in the landscape. The two mountains in County Kerry represented her breasts and are known to this day as the Paps of Anu. The rivers were her veins. The wells were an entrance into her fertile womb. Through her, the land was a living, fertile, feminine being, producing new offspring among the animals and new harvests from the land every year. The goddess of the land of Ireland was a triple goddess who could appear in three different forms. In spring, she appeared in the land as a maiden. In the summer, she appeared in the land as a mother. In the winter, she appeared in the land as an old woman or hag. This triple goddess story takes another form in the story of the Celts invading Ireland. The Celts, or Milesians as they were then known, landed their boats near Kenmare in County Kerry and marched northeast towards the hill of Tara. As they marched, they encountered the goddess of the land of Ireland 3 times. Each time they encountered her, she took a different form and had a different name. Her 3 names were Banba, Fowla, and Eriu. At each encounter, her request was the same. She required the invaders to name the land after her. From this story, we get the name Ireland, named after Eriu. Irish poets, over the centuries, have also used her other names, Banba and Fowla, to write patriotic poems about the land of Ireland. This sense of the sacredness of all of the land and of certain locations on it gave a direction to and marked a boundary around the behaviour of the people within this environment. Their attitude everywhere had to be one of respect and reverence. In a mythological sense, these people were married to the land. This myth was ritualized on the day their king was crowned. A ritual was performed which married this new king to the goddess of the land. The ceremony was known as Bainish Rí, the king's wedding. The partnership this created required that the king would rule his people justly, and in return, the goddess of the land would make the earth fertile and the people would prosper. These various stories about the goddess of the land represent different strands and influences within the cultural tradition. The tradition was oral. Nothing was written down. The stories were passed on through the generations without any centralized control. This is the essential difference between polytheism and monotheism. Polytheism embraces diversity and allows all forms and versions of stories to exist side by side. Those who practice it are not upset by contradictions or anomalies. Monotheism, on the other hand, cannot tolerate diversity of belief and has a need to exercise control from the top down. A rich collection of mythological stories. The number and diversity of gods and goddesses within Celtic polytheism facilitated the development of a rich collection of mythological stories. These stories touched on the core issues of life, tackling human dilemmas, throwing light on aspects of human behaviour, and giving explanations for natural phenomena. In the Celtic tradition, Manannán was the god of the sea. He lived on islands off the coast, and is most associated with an island seen dimly off the east coast of Ireland. This island, the Isle of Man, is called after him and was his throne. Most of the phenomena connected with the sea, storms, mist, coastal erosion, were attributed to Manannán. He could make land appear and disappear. He was a master of tricks and illusions. His horse, Éanbar, could ride both sea and land, and could be seen from time to time on the waves. His boat, Ocean Sweeper, obeyed the thoughts of those who travelled on it, and had neither sail nor oar. He had a sword, Fragrach, that no armour could resist. Manannán wore a great cloak that could take on any colour, just like the sea. He was responsible for leading people who had died beyond the sea to Tir na nÓg, the land of youth. He was also the defender of the land of Ireland, and his roar could be heard from the sea whenever Ireland was attacked. As Ireland was a small country surrounded by the sea, the stories of Manannán, god of the sea, and of his father Lir, abounded. As Ireland was a small country surrounded by the sea, the stories of Manannán, god of the sea, and of his father Lir, abounded. These stories captured the human experience of mystery and wonder associated with the sea, and personified the forces that were at work in connection with it. However, while Manannán was the god of the sea, he was not the sea itself, and he actually lived on land, on an island. Polytheistic mythology acts as a mirror. In traditional polytheistic societies of the past, the world of the gods reflected the world of the humans in an archetypical way. The gods were anthropomorphic archetypes, reflecting back to human society types of character, personality, and human behaviour that were already in their midst. Gods were male and female. They married and had children. Polytheistic mythology acted as a mirror to society, as well as being a crucible in which society was formed. The lives of the gods and goddesses of polytheism were similar to those of humans. The tensions and difficulties between particular gods and goddesses were generally illustrative of archetypal patterns to be found among humans. The stories offered insight and often wisdom with regard to the problems of human living. Modern psychology, based on Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, has been able to use Greek and other mythologies to good effect in analysing and explaining the psychological mechanisms of human behaviour. Freud, for example, developed the notion of the Oedipus complex, based on the Greek legend where King Oedipus was destined to kill his father and marry his mother. Freud used this story to explain the period in a male child's development, his Oedipal stage, where the child is jealous of his father and wants to take his place as the mother's partner. What early polytheistic mythologies presented in story form Modern scientific disciplines of psychoanalysis, psychology, and the social sciences present in a more scientific form. Science has taken over as a way of explaining life, and mythology has been dismissed as an anachronism. The great argument for science over mythology is that science, being empirical, deals with objective reality. What is becoming clear today, however, is that even the scientific form is wrapped in the mythology of those who practice it, and is not as objective as was once believed. Polytheism reflects the complexity of life. Stories of gods and goddesses reflect the complexity of human life. Deities were often presented in conflict with each other, illustrating that there were no easy answers to some of life's thorny issues. Cuchulainn was a legendary Irish hero who was married to Emer. However, he fell in love with Fand, the wife of Manannán, and went to live with her for a while. While Cuchulainn lived in the world of humans, Fand and Manannán were divinities of the other world. Cuchulainn could only come back to Emer when Manannán shook his cloak between the two lovers, so that Cuchulainn forgot about Fand. This story is a way of describing a regular phenomenon among humans today. Most of us have come across a situation where a married man falls in love with another woman, the result of which is an estrangement between himself and his wife. He has, as it were, come under the spell of someone else. For many men, this happens unintentionally and therefore unconsciously. It is as if the other world has taken over. If the man wishes to resolve the dilemma and return to his wife, he will probably have to receive some form of therapy, a magical ritual, which would break the spell. If he attended a Jungian therapist, for example, he might learn that he had projected an archetype onto this other woman and fallen in love with this archetype rather than the woman herself. Having realized this, he might then decide to return to his wife and attempt to heal the damage in their relationship. The Cuchulainn story illustrates this dilemma in mythological form. Another legend in the Irish tradition that illustrates this point is the story of Diarmuid and Gráinne. This story encapsulates the difficulties that arise between different generations. Gráinne, the daughter of the Irish High King, Cormac Mac Art, promised herself in marriage to Fionn McCool, the legendary Irish warrior. However, when she got up close to him on the day of their betrothal, she realized he was old enough to be her father and not quite as handsome as she had at first thought. So she ran away with a young warrior named Diarmuid O'Doivne. Diarmuid was a reluctant LOP. He wished to remain loyal to his leader, Fionn, and he also feared punishment. Diarmuid and Gráinne were chased across the length and breadth of Ireland by Fionn McCool and Cormac Mac Art for a period of 16 years. They were never caught, but had to be constantly on the move and constantly one step ahead of their pursuers. As their advisor, they had the god of youth and romance, Angus Og, who counselled them on how to avoid capture. This element of the story illustrates that at least they had one god on their side. In the course of their long period of elopement, the relationship of Diarmuid and Gráinne grew and was cemented. Eventually, a truce with Fionn and Cormac was called, and they were allowed to settle down and rear a family. It took a further 20 years or so before a reconciliation was attempted between themselves and the older generation. This story encapsulates the perennial difficulties that arise between different generations, where the younger generation believes in something or wants to do something that does not have the approval of the elders. This situation is typified even today in a son or daughter wanting to marry someone who does not have the approval of his or her parents. In the legend, the story lets the young people win, but only after paying the huge price of being on the run for 16 years. Humans dependent on divine relationships. Gods and goddesses of polytheistic societies lived in another world that ran alongside the human world. They interacted with each other just as humans do. However, human life was completely dependent on them. When these gods interacted with each other, the lives of the humans were affected also. Lu and Bui were two such divinities in the Celtic realm. Lu being associated with the sun, and Bui with the earth. They were seen as being in a sexual relationship. That relationship was essential to the welfare of the human population. For this reason, not only were there mythological stories concerning this relationship, there were rituals performed by the humans to ensure that the benefits of this relationship were delivered to them. One such ritual developed around wells. Country people in Ireland to this day continued the tradition of visiting the local holy well. At this well, people walk around the well 7 times before approaching it directly, kneeling at it and blessing themselves with the water. Nowadays, this is regarded as a Christian tradition, and the well is usually named after a Christian saint. However, the practice of regarding the well as holy and performing ritual rounds at it predates Christianity. In Irish polytheistic society, the well signified an entrance into the womb of the goddess of the earth. As such, it was a focus of feminine fertility. One visited the well to get in touch with the divine energies that made the earth and every living thing on it fertile. Early peoples saw that the sun had a role to play in this fertility. The sun gave the appearance of rotating around the earth. It rose in the east, travelled across the southern sky, and set in the west, to rise again in the east the following morning. Based on appearances, and not on scientific data, the sun did a round of the earth each day. To these people, the sun was associated with the male god, Lu, while the earth was associated with the female goddess, Bui. The relationship of Lu and Bui was expressed in this daily cosmic round. During the day, they danced together as the sun traversed the sky. At sunset, they went to bed together. It was this relationship that gave fertility to the earth and brought forth the annual harvest. The people saw themselves as being totally dependent on this relationship between the two divinities. Without this relationship, there would be no fertility or harvest on the earth. The important thing for humans was to be in harmony with the relationship of Bui and Lu, and to imitate that relationship in their own lives. When ancient peoples visited the wells, therefore, they imitated the sun and walked around the well in a sunwise direction. Having walked 7 rounds, representing the 7 known planets, they then approached the well for a blessing. In doing this, they were aligning themselves with the energies of the cosmic cycle of sun and earth, balancing the reproductive energies of their own bodies with those of the cosmos, and putting their fertility cycles in tune with those of the gods. As a result, many rituals associated with this myth were sexual. The purpose of myth. Mythology is the way in which the deepest meanings of life are conveyed for a particular culture. In the modern world, the stories of these ancient mythologies are often dismissed as not being historically true or accurate. The word myth is used as a derogatory term. This is to miss the point. Mythology is created within a culture not to convey historical facts, but to convey the deepest meaning and purpose of life within that particular culture. Myths may not convey accurate historical facts, but they do convey depth of meaning and value. Mythological stories contain nourishment for the soul. For this reason, like good classical music, they can be remembered and recounted again and again. They feed the human spirit at the deepest level. Stories such as these convey truths that are beyond history. The mythological story committed to memory acts like a slowly dissolving sweet in the mouth, gradually releasing the sugar of insight and meaning into the human mind and heart. Humankind cannot live without myth. While modern Western society dismisses the mythologies of ancient civilizations, the truth is that modern Western society also has its myths. The most obvious modern myth is the myth of monotheism, but from this myth are derived many others, such as the myths of progress and development, the myths of materialism and consumerism, and the myth that there is no alternative to capitalism, known as Tina. The challenge to us today is to consciously acknowledge our myths. This means naming them and recognizing their existence. They are our unquestioned certainties. We see the world through them, like spectacles sitting on our noses, but are oblivious to the effect they are having on our vision. To become conscious is to become aware that our present-day certainties may not be the certainties of the future. It is to acknowledge that the more we know we don't know. It is to replace the arrogance of the West with the humility that connects us with the humus and that earths us. If we can live consciously within our mythologies, we will not be entrapped or confined or blinded by them. The other world. Those who lived in the Celtic world of polytheism were surrounded by the gods. They lived in a dual world, the material world, which they could touch and feel, see and hear, and the spiritual world, peopled by gods and spirits who are active all around them and manifest themselves to them in many different ways. There was this world, and there was the other world. In this world, the consciousness of the divine was a constant in daily life. The culture had created an association between each everyday item or event in a human's life and a particular spiritual energy. In the cosmos, for example, the sun and moon and all the planets represented divine figures. The days of the week were named after them, so that each got its day to be honoured. Even now, in the English language, Sunday and Monday are named after the sun and moon, and Saturday is named after Saturn. We also have Thursday, named after the god Thor, and Tuesday, in some European languages, named after Mars. In the Irish language, the word for day and God are the same, day. Within the natural environment in which these people lived, their deities were projected onto the rivers, the mountains, the lakes, and the sea, as well as into the cosmos. Aspects and stories of these deities were associated with particular animals, birds and plants, and were often specifically located in various areas of their landscape. In Irish society, the raven was associated with the Morrigan, the goddess of death and the battlefield. The mistletoe berries were the semen of the god Esus, whose spirit dwelt in the oak tree. Mistletoe was used to represent sexual fertility, love, and marriage. Through shape changing, the spirit of a human being could be manifested in an animal, so one was never too sure what or who one was encountering when an animal appeared. One could not go out into nature without being conscious of some god or spirit being close by. The spirit world was also associated with certain dates in the Celtic calendar year. The Celtic festivals that divide the year into 4 seasons, Imbolc, Bealtaine, Lunasa, and Samhain, marked moments of transition in the cycle of nature and in the lives of the people. At these transition times, it was believed that the veil between this world and the spirit world wore very thin. The spirit world opened up to the people, and there was a heightened spiritual consciousness among them. At these festivals, various ritual celebrations were performed. At Imbolc, the first day of spring, children went from door to door carrying a straw doll and inviting people to welcome Bridget, the goddess of spring, into their homes. For each of these festivals, particular communal rituals brought into relief the presence and contribution of the gods in human affairs. Some of these gods were nasty, ill-tempered, or downright evil. For example, Morrigan, the goddess of war, was violent and ruthless. Crom Dubh, the god of the harvest, was mean. And Manannán, the god of the sea, was a trickster. It was the presence of these gods that explained the evil, the struggle, and the pain in the world. The mythological stories explained in archetypal terms how things got to be the way they were. The humans, for their part, developed rituals to protect themselves and ward off this evil and pain. Ritual and worship. In these polytheistic societies, ritual was a daily part of life. While communities had their dedicated priests, druids, or shamans to conduct the more important rituals, everyone practiced ritual on a daily basis at a more mundane level. As the gods and spirits were a constant daily presence, rituals had to be performed regularly throughout the day to honour them, appease them, or protect oneself from them. This could take the form of candles or oil lamps being lit, incense being burnt, food being offered, shrines being visited, as well as by bodily postures, actions, and formulae of words. People's homes were full of reminders of the sacred. An altar, symbols, offerings, and ritual items, and people used sacred water, as well as candles, oil, and incense. This spiritual awareness also found its way into people's language. Where a language developed alongside a particular polytheistic mythology, the language itself became inseparable from this mythology. Greetings and farewells became a prayer of blessing with the mention of a particular god or goddess. Expressions during human conversation called in the aid of a particular deity or prayed protection against another. These theistic expressions are still present in the Irish language in phrases such as Balla ó dhiart, Gnohi diogit, Banach déirt, Bailo dhia ar an obair. In this way, the mundane, everyday events of human life were stitched into the great overarching lives of the deities. As a result, life took on a deep meaning, purpose, and value. No need for religious buildings. Because these gods and goddesses in polytheistic society were so omnipresent, so close by, and so enmeshed in the natural environment of the people, there was no need for churches and religious buildings as we have them today. Some polytheistic cultures did create religious buildings, particularly where these cultures became great civilizations, as in Egypt, Greece, and Rome. But on the whole, one finds these deities worshipped in the home and outdoors in the landscape. There were no religious buildings in pre-Christian Celtic society. For formal ceremonies, the Druids gathered in sacred groves of oak trees. Their other sacred places were often marked by standing stones or stone circles, or were simply hilltops, wells, or cliff edges. Divine and human intertwine. In this polytheistic world, where mythological mysteries were inseparably blended with the daily tasks and events of life, there was no escaping the consciousness or experience of the divine. The divine world and the human world were so closely intertwined that it was possible for someone to be born to a human mother and a divine father, or the other way round. Cuchyglen, the legendary hero, had a human mother, Dectra, and a divine father, Lu. In Irish legends, many gods appeared in human form and interact with humans as if they themselves were human. These ideas were later to manifest themselves in Christianity, where Jesus is a God who appears in human form and has a human mother and a divine father. The proximity of gods and goddesses. While we today live in a monotheistic world where the only God who exists lives far away in heaven, the gods of the polytheistic world were always close by. Some of them resided in the natural features of the landscape, such as mountains and rivers. Others could be encountered by approaching various plants, animals, or birds. Even those that were free of environmental anchors were imagined as living in the sky directly above. There were certain gods whom one had to travel a long distance to encounter. But even these journeys, called Imram, were imagined as taking place within the parameters of this earth. While requiring heroism, they were humanly possible. Polytheism, an inculturated tradition. Polytheism, wherever one finds it, is an inculturated, environmentally integrated, and indigenous expression of spirituality. As such, it is part of the cultural tradition of a people, alongside their other cultural traditions. Ireland has had its own indigenous spiritual tradition that goes back millennia. This spiritual tradition stands alongside its music and dance traditions and its traditions in arts and crafts. Until interfered with by outside agencies, indigenous cultures were an integrated whole. Spirituality was interwoven with and inseparable from every other aspect of life. Today, Western society lives with institutionalized religion. This means that spiritual practices are no longer the creation of a local, dynamic, indigenous culture, but are generally set and controlled by an authoritarian system far removed from anything local or indigenous. In polytheistic societies, the religious beliefs and practices of the people emerged, for the most part unconsciously, through the community and were not encoded or enforced from the top down. Direction came from within a dynamic, creative, and imaginative community, rather than from an institutional framework. Within these communities, the spiritual leaders, who were priests, druids, or shamans, did hold some power. However, their power was limited by the extent of their ability to have an influence on the deities or to read their intentions. These deities were beyond their control and were often believed to be fickle, rash, or simply inattentive. Some indigenous spiritual practices remain. Some of these ancient indigenous Celtic practices remain with us, outside the control of institutionalized religion. Halloween, as practiced on the Aran Islands, is an example of such a practice. The festival's more correct title is Samhain, meaning the transition time between the old and new year, which takes place in the Celtic calendar on the night of the 31st of October. According to the Samhain myth, this is a night caught between 2 years, a night when the veil between this world and the other world is lifted. On this night, the human world and the spirit world come together more closely than at any other time of the year. Traditionally, on the Aran Islands, this night is celebrated by adults dressing up in otherworld clothes and going out into the night. Houses, pubs, and public places are visited by those dressed up, otherworld creatures, who are silent, mysterious, and unpredictable. For the observer, the night is an eerie experience of the familiar blending with the completely other. This is an example of an indigenous spiritual practice that has survived in Ireland from pre-Christian times despite the presence of institutionalized religion. No committee organizes this event and no authority controls it. It has never been institutionalized, yet it has remained true to an ancient mythology that was supposedly driven out of Ireland by St. Patrick in the 5th century. Divine authority in polytheism. Hierarchical power structures that were rooted in the divine authority of a god or of gods did not develop in polytheistic societies. Because these societies had so many gods and goddesses, divine authority was diffused. There were, of course, dominant gods and less relevant gods. Humans needed to be on good terms with the dominant gods and goddesses, and so offered sacrifices to them or honoured them in some way. But being on good terms with one god did not guarantee being on good terms with them all. Indeed, it is clear from the legends handed down from these cultures that these gods and goddesses were often at odds with each other. In the Greek myths, there are many illustrations of this point. Zeus fights against the Titans and creates jealousy and enmity because of his sexual affairs. Gaia has Uranus castrated. Cronus swallows each of his children as they are born, fearing that one of them will take over his throne. This happens anyway. In Celtic myths, it is the same. Dagda has a secret affair with Nectan's wife, Boine, and produces Angus Og. Macha fights and defeats her cousins, Dihorba and Kimbeath, because they will not allow a woman take the throne as High King of Ireland. Balor throws the infant Lugh into the sea, believing that he will drown, but he is rescued by Manannán. Later in the story, Balor and Lugh confront each other in battle and fight to the death. In polytheistic societies, the influence of different gods and goddesses pulled people in different directions, often in conflicting directions. There was little chance of a cohesive vision coming from the myriad deities. Individual people could be looked after and guided by a particular god or goddess, generally for a specific task, but this is not the case for whole society. Polytheism reflected diversity rather than oneness. Polytheism cannot offer a universal vision. For this reason, polytheism did not offer a universal vision for society. While it served to reflect society to itself, and also to contain that society within certain parameters, it did not offer that society as a whole a clear, focused direction. Polytheism of itself was not capable of producing concepts like progress or development. While nowadays we understand time in a linear fashion and have a sense of evolution and of history, polytheistic societies understood time in a more cyclic fashion, based on the yearly round. Everything that they experienced was expected to come around again and again. Continuous linear change, which is so much a part of our own lives today, was not a part of their lives and was not how they saw the world. Polytheism cannot be fundamentalist. The rich mythology of polytheistic societies prevented the emergence of fundamentalism or even dogmatism. The answers to life's questions were contained in colourful stories of gods and goddesses. These answers were not dogmatic, and one could make what one liked of them. There was room for choice and for interpretation. Fundamentalism is the tendency to believe that one has the definitive answers to some of life's deepest questions. Modern monotheism, in all its forms, facilitates this tendency because it has from the beginning promoted the concept of dogma. Dogma is the institutionalized insistence that the institution's teaching is correct and all other beliefs are wrong. Those who make such dogmatic and fundamentalist pronouncements claim that their authority and their source of truth is in the one God, and that this God is the supreme being. There were not the same possibilities of fundamentalist beliefs within polytheistic societies, particularly where nothing was written down. Hinduism today remains a good example of this. By and large, Hinduism is very tolerant of diversity in belief and doctrine. The belief systems of polytheistic societies did not allow individuals to claim exclusive access to divine authority, as monotheism was to do. It is clear from Greek polytheism, Celtic polytheism, and many other polytheistic societies that hierarchical social control mechanisms, which had divine beings at their head, were not present, except where political leaders themselves claimed to be gods. Egyptian and Roman society. In Egyptian and later in Roman society, a mechanism did develop whereby the pharaoh and the Roman emperor claimed divinity on their enthronement. In these situations, the pharaoh and the Roman emperor were gods among other gods. Therefore, they did not have ultimate control. Nonetheless, their status as gods among the people did confer upon them an absolute power. It gave them the status they required to exercise central control and served to help quell any rebellion against them. Moses grew up in Egypt during the period of the pharaohs. According to the story in the Bible, he was raised in the courts of the pharaoh. He therefore saw how divine authority, channeled through a human, could be used to control and direct a whole society. Perhaps it was this experience which planted a seed, even subconsciously, in his mind. Later, he was to take this idea a stage further through the introduction of monotheism.
Mist and magic. There is a mist tonight, so I ventured out. Good God in sacrament. I stilled to hold a dog daisy covered in dew dust. I stilled, worshipping, and saw my hand in the light of the mist, then jumped my gaze to imagine my whole person wrapped in that mesh of delicate, elusive vapour. Caught up in its whispers, my soul heard tales of what had been on this soil, and how I am ever in its grasp, trapped by its passion. The donkey, cautiously watching from the stone wall, didn't frighten as I came up close. We both stood, bound in the mystery for seconds, in seconds fleeing to eternity and back. On the road again, I waited for the others, all to head home together, and hid the scene in a pocket of my mind, to bathe in once more, remembering mist and magic.